The archaeological site on Kepler 442b had been abandoned for 3,000 years, give or take a century. The obsidian tablet sat in the center of the excavation pit, radiating heat that made the air shimmer like a mirage. Dr. Jessica Chen's thermal scanner registered 847 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt lead, hot enough to make every other species in the galaxy back away. Fascinating, murmured Thecnor, the Valesian expedition leader. His crystalline eyes reflected the tablet's dark surface. The heat signature is increasing. In my 340 years of archaeology, I have never encountered such an anomaly. Jessica knelt at the edge of the pit, her human features composed in concentration. The tablet was roughly 2 meters tall and half a meter wide, its surface carved with symbols that seemed to writhe in the heat waves. Around her, the 12-species expedition team maintained a respectful distance. Even the Chronaxi, whose homeworld orbited a red giant, kept their distance. The radiation is non-ionizing, reported James Kim, the expedition's chief engineer, checking his readouts. But that heat, Jessica, protocol says we need to wait for the cooling drones. Protocol was written by species who don't understand, Jessica said quietly. She stood dusting off her knees and began walking down the earthen ramp into the pit. Dr. Chen, Thecnor's translator, crackled with alarm. The heat will kill you. Jessica didn't respond. She'd spent 6 months traveling to this forgotten world, 2 years before that studying the fragments of text that had led them here. The symbols on the tablet weren't random. They were a message, and somehow, impossibly, she knew it was meant for her species. James moved to follow, but Jessica raised a hand. Stay back, James. This is something I need to do. You're not making sense, he called out, but his voice carried more concern than criticism. They'd been friends since university, had worked together on 4 expeditions. He knew that look in her eyes. The heat intensified with each step. At 5 meters, Jessica's suit began to protest, warning lights flickering across her heads-up display. At 3 meters, the environmental controls started to fail. The other species watched in horror and fascination. Humans were known for their resilience, but this seemed like suicide. At 1 meter, Jessica could feel her skin beginning to burn even through the suit's insulation. The logical part of her mind screamed to retreat, but there was something else, something deeper than logic, pulling her forward. The symbols on the tablet had begun to glow, pulsing with an amber light that seemed to synchronize with her heartbeat. She remembered reading about this place in the ancient database they'd discovered in the Andromeda sector. The Forerunners, that's what the xenoarchaeologists called them, had seeded the galaxy with technology millions of years ago, long before any current civilization had evolved. But their artifacts were dying, their power sources depleted, their purposes forgotten, all except this one. Jessica removed her glove. No. The cry came from multiple species simultaneously, a chorus of alarm in a dozen languages. Her bare hand reached out, and the moment her palm touched the obsidian surface, the world exploded into light and memory. We knew you would come, a voice said directly into her mind, ancient and warm. We waited so long for a species that could remember. Images flooded through her consciousness. Earth in its infancy, primates learning to use fire, humans discovering agriculture, building cities, reaching for the stars. But intertwined with humanity's history were others, the Forerunners themselves walking alongside humans throughout history, unseen, unnoticed, guiding gently from the shadows. Why? Jessica gasped, her hand still pressed against the tablet despite the heat that should have been cooking her flesh. Because you alone inherited our gift, the voice replied, the gift of stubborn persistence, of refusing to accept limitations, of touching fire to understand it rather than fearing it from afar. The tablet's heat was changing, not cooling but transforming. What had been destructive warmth became something else, energy, raw and pure, flowing into Jessica and through her. Her DNA, she realized, carried markers the Forerunners had planted 1,000,000 years ago, not to control humanity, but to enable this moment. I remember you, Jessica whispered, and suddenly she did. Not her personally, but the species' memory that lived in human genes. The mysterious strangers who had taught the first humans to control fire, who had whispered to ancient engineers building impossible monuments, who had inspired dreamers to look up at the stars and wonder. The tablet pulsed once more, then began to cool, As the temperature dropped rapidly, the glowing symbols rearranged themselves into a language Jessica could read: instructions, coordinates, and an invitation. She pulled her hand away, examining it. Not even a first-degree burn. Behind her, the expedition team stood in stunned silence. Deknor was the first to speak. How are you alive?" Jessica turned, her eyes reflecting something ancient and knowing. "Because they made us to survive what others cannot. They made us to remember when others forget. They made us to touch the impossible and say, 'I understand.'" James descended into the pit, his scanner going wild. "The tablet's readable now." Jessica, it's a map. To more sites like this. Hundreds of them. Thousands," Jessica corrected, the Forerunner knowledge still echoing in her mind, scattered across every galaxy, waiting for humans to find them, waiting for a species too stubborn to let a little heat stop them from seeking truth. She looked at her unmarked hand, then back at the tablet. Humanity had always been the species that touched the hot stove twice, that reached for fire despite the burn, that pushed boundaries others considered sacred. The Forerunners hadn't created that trait. They'd recognized it, nurtured it, and left behind an inheritance only humans could claim. "I remember you," she said again to the now cool tablet, to the ancient voices that had shaped humanity's path. "And I promise we'll remember for all who've forgotten." Above, in the alien sky of Kepler 442b, 3 moons rose in perfect alignment, just as they had 3,000 years ago, when the Forerunners had left their final gift. The universe, vast and mysterious, had been waiting. Humanity had finally arrived to collect what had always been theirs.